The space colony of Vestronine was unlike any other place in the galaxy. It was a home for many species, each with their own customs, languages, and traditions. Among them was Commander Eric Carter, a human diplomat and former soldier, known for his intelligence and bravery. He had seen many strange things in his life, but nothing could prepare him for what was about to happen. That evening, Eric sat in a quiet tea house on the colony's upper level, enjoying a moment of peace. The neon lights outside flickered, and the air smelled of exotic spices. He had just finished a long day of negotiations with the Rule Carry, an alien race known for their strict traditions. As he sipped his drink, a hooded figure entered the tea house and walked straight toward him. The woman removed her hood, revealing her pale blue skin, silver eyes, and long braided hair. She was a Rule Carry, but something about her seemed different. She looked nervous, almost desperate. "Commander Carter," she asked in a soft, trembling voice. Eric studied her carefully. He had met many Rule Carry before, but he didn't recognize her. "Yes," he replied cautiously. "Who are you?" "My name is Soraya," she said. "I need your help. I have an offer for you." Eric raised an eyebrow. He had been offered many things before: alliances, trades, even bribes. But the way she spoke made him uneasy. "What kind of offer?" Soraya took a deep breath, glancing around as if afraid someone might be watching. Then she leaned in and whispered the words that made Eric freeze. "I want you to take my daughter as your concubine." For a moment, there was complete silence. Eric stared at her, thinking he had misheard. "Excuse me," he said, his voice calm but firm. "My daughter," Soraya repeated. "She is of age. I offer her to you." Eric put down his drink. "That's not how humans work," he said. "And I don't think that's how your people work either." Soraya's hands trembled as she reached into her cloak and pulled out a small data chip. She placed it on the table between them. "Please," she said, "just look at this." Eric hesitated but finally picked up the chip and inserted it into his wrist device. A holographic image appeared in front of him. It was a young Rule Carry woman, probably no older than 20 in human years. She had the same silver eyes as Soraya, but there was fear in them. The video showed her standing in a dark chamber, speaking quickly in her native language. A translation ran across the screen. "Mother, I am running out of time. Please, find a way. He is coming for me." Eric felt a strange chill run down his spine. He looked back at Soraya. "Who is coming for her?" Soraya's voice was barely a whisper. "The Warlord." Eric had heard that name before. The Rule Carry Warlord was a ruthless leader, known for taking what he wanted: planets, power, and even people. But why would he be after Soraya's daughter? "Why me?" Eric asked. "You could have asked anyone in your own species for help." Soraya shook her head. No Rule Carry man would dare oppose him. "And humans are different. You are freed from our customs. You have power in ways we do not." Eric leaned back, thinking carefully. This wasn't just a simple marriage proposal. This was a desperate plea for protection. If what Soraya said was true, then her daughter was in serious danger. But why would she think he could protect her? "This is insane," Eric said finally. "You're asking me to take in a girl I've never met. Someone I don't even know if I can trust." Soraya's eyes filled with tears. "If you don't, she will be taken. And once the Warlord has her, she will be lost forever." Eric wanted to walk away. He had enough problems of his own without getting involved in alien politics. But something about the fear in Soraya's eyes made him pause. This wasn't just about tradition or honor. This was about survival. Before he could say anything, the door to the tea house suddenly slammed open. 3 tall Rule Carry enforcers stepped inside, their armor shining under the dim lights. Their eyes locked onto Soraya, and one of them spoke in a deep, cold voice. "Soraya, you have been warned. You will come with us. Now." Eric watched as Soraya froze in terror. The enforcers weren't here to negotiate. They were here to take her by force. Eric clenched his fists. He had two choices: stay out of it and let them take her, or get involved and change the course of his life forever. He only had a second to decide. Eric's heartbeat quickened as he locked eyes with the rule-carry enforcers standing in the doorway. Their expressions were cold, their posture rigid with authority. The entire tea house had gone silent. The other patrons, both human and alien, quickly turned away, pretending not to notice. No one wanted trouble with the enforcers. Soraya's breathing became unsteady. Her fingers gripped the edge of the table, knuckles turning white. She was trying to stay calm, but Eric could see the raw fear in her eyes. One of the enforcers took a step forward. "Soraya, you know the consequences of disobedience. The warlord has given you a chance to surrender willingly. Do not make this difficult." Eric exhaled slowly, his mind racing. He had no reason to interfere. This wasn't his fight. Getting involved meant stepping into a dangerous world of alien politics and power struggles. It meant making an enemy of the most feared ruler in the sector. And yet, he looked at Soraya again. The desperation in her eyes wasn't just for herself. It was for her daughter. A girl he had never met. A girl who was running out of time. Eric had spent years on the battlefield, watching innocent people suffer because no one stood up for them. He had promised himself that if he ever had the chance to make a difference, he would take it. This was one of those moments. He pushed his chair back, rising slowly. The enforcers immediately shifted their attention to him, their hands moving toward their weapons. "Soraya is with me," Eric said firmly. "She's not going anywhere." A tense silence followed. The lead enforcer narrowed his eyes. "You do not understand, human. This is not your concern. She belongs to the warlord now." Eric crossed his arms, his voice unwavering. "Funny. I don't see the warlord here. Just a bunch of his lapdogs trying to intimidate a woman who doesn't want to go with them." The enforcer's jaw tightened. "Step aside. This is your only warning." Eric didn't move. His instincts kicked in, assessing the situation. 3 enforcers. Armed. Trained. If they attacked, it would get ugly fast. But he wasn't exactly defenseless either. Before the enforcers could react, Soraya suddenly reached for Eric's arm. Her grip was tight. "Please," she whispered. "We have to go. Now." Eric didn't hesitate. He grabbed the data chip from the table and turned toward the back exit. The enforcers lunged forward, but Eric was faster. He pulled Soraya with him, knocking over a chair to slow them down. "Stop them," one of the enforcers shouted. Eric shoved open the back door, stepping into the dimly lit alleyway behind the tea house. The air smelled of burning fuel and damp metal. His mind worked fast. He needed an escape route. Soraya clutched his sleeve. "They won't stop chasing us," she said breathlessly. "The warlord does not tolerate defiance." Eric glanced around. A few meters away, a hoverbike was parked near a stack of metal crates. It wasn't locked. "Can you ride?" he asked. Soraya shook her head. "Then hold on tight." Eric sprinted toward the bike, pulling Soraya with him. The enforcers burst through the door just as he activated the ignition. The engine roared to life. "Get on," he ordered. Soraya hesitated for only a second before swinging her leg over the seat behind him. The enforcers raised their weapons, but before they could fire, Eric twisted the throttle. The bike shot forward, the force nearly knocking Soraya off. Blaster bolts zipped past them, lighting up the alley in flashes of blue energy. Eric weaved between the crates, dodging debris as they sped toward the lower district. The enforcers weren't far behind. He could hear the sound of engines roaring to life. They were in pursuit. Soraya clung to him tightly. "Where are we going?" she shouted over the wind. "Somewhere safe," Eric replied. Though in truth, he had no idea where that was yet. A neon sign flashed overhead as they entered a maze of narrow streets. The lower district was chaotic, filled with market stalls, repair shops, and old cargo haulers. It was the perfect place to lose a tail. But the enforcers were relentless. Eric glanced at his side mirror. They were gaining on him. He gritted his teeth. Hold on. Pulling the bike into a sharp turn, he veered into a dark tunnel beneath an old docking bay. The moment they entered, Eric reached for the holo panel on the bike's dashboard. With a quick command, he activated a cloaking shield, making them nearly invisible. The enforcers' bikes zoomed past the entrance of the tunnel, missing them by inches. Eric held his breath. Seconds passed, then minutes. Finally, the sounds of the enforcers faded into the distance. Soraya exhaled shakily. Did we lose them? For now, Eric said. He deactivated the cloaking shield and pulled the bike to a stop. They were deep in the shadows, hidden beneath the towering structures of Vestra 9's underbelly. It wasn't much, but it was safe, for the moment. Soraya's hands were still shaking. Eric could feel her tension as she climbed off the bike. She looked at him, her silver eyes filled with gratitude, and something else. Hope. I owe you my life, she said softly. Eric shook his head. You don't owe me anything, but you do owe me answers. Soraya swallowed hard. I'll tell you everything. But first, we need to find my daughter. Eric nodded. Then let's get to work. Eric leaned against the wall of the dimly lit alley, his mind racing. The neon lights of Vestra 9's underbelly flickered above him, casting eerie shadows on the cracked pavement. Soraya sat on an overturned crate, catching her breath. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. The only sound was the distant hum of air traffic and the occasional murmur of street vendors closing up shop for the night. Finally, Eric broke the silence. Start from the beginning. Who is your daughter, and why does the warlord want her? Soraya hesitated. Her silver eyes, still filled with fear, met his. Her name is Lyrian, she said softly. She's only 13. And she's different. Eric frowned. Different how? Soraya swallowed hard, glancing around as if someone might be listening. She was born with something the warlord calls the gift. It's rare. Only a handful of people in the galaxy have it, and he wants to control all of them. Eric narrowed his eyes. What kind of gift? Soraya hesitated, then whispered, She can see time. A chill ran down Eric's spine. See time. Soraya nodded. She doesn't just predict the future. She experiences it before it happens. In her mind, she's already lived through moments that haven't even occurred yet. The warlord believes she can give him an advantage in war, that she can foresee battles, betrayals, power shifts. He wants to use her. Eric exhaled sharply. And what do you want? Soraya's expression hardened. I want to get her as far away from him as possible. Eric ran a hand through his hair. He had been expecting trouble, but this was a whole new level. A girl who could see time. A ruthless warlord hunting her down. He had tangled with powerful people before, but this was bigger than anything he'd ever been part of. Still, he had already made his choice when he stood up to the enforcers back at the tea house. There was no turning back now. Eric straightened. Where is she? Soraya's hands tightened into fists. They took her. His jaw clenched. Where? The warlord's flagship, the Obsidian Fang. It's in orbit right now, docked at the upper station. Eric let out a slow breath. Breaking into a warlord's flagship was practically suicide. It was the kind of mission that got men killed before they even stepped foot inside. But then again, he had done impossible things before. We'll need a plan, he said. Soraya nodded. I might know someone who can help. Eric raised an eyebrow. Who? She took a deep breath. An old friend. She used to work for the warlord. She escaped years ago and has been hiding ever since. If anyone knows a way onto that ship, it's her. Eric considered this. Where do we find her? Soraya hesitated. She runs a black market supply hub in the abandoned industrial sector. It's not safe. The place is crawling with mercenaries, bounty hunters, and exiles. Eric smirked. Sounds like my kind of crowd. Soraya didn't smile. You don't understand. She won't trust us. If we show up uninvited, she might have us killed before we even speak a word. Eric crossed his arms. Then we'll make sure she listens. The industrial sector was a ruin of rusted metal, shattered glass, and flickering lights. Towering structures, once part of a thriving manufacturing district, now stood abandoned, their walls covered in graffiti and scorch marks from old battles. The air smelled of burned fuel and damp concrete. Eric and Soraya moved carefully through the maze of debris and makeshift shelters, keeping to the shadows. The deeper they went, the more signs of life they saw. Armed men guarding doorways, black market traders arguing over stolen goods, cybernetically enhanced mercenaries scanning the area for potential threats. Finally, they reached their destination. A towering metal door stood before them, its surface covered in deep scratches and rusted bolts. 2 guards flanked it, hulking brutes with cybernetic implants and plasma rifles slung across their backs. Their glowing red eyes locked onto Eric and Soraya as they approached. No one gets in without an invitation, one of them growled. Soraya stepped forward. We need to see Vena. The guards didn't move. Vena doesn't take visitors. Eric sighed. He had been hoping to do this the easy way. Instead, he took a slow step forward, making sure they saw the heavy blaster strapped to his thigh. Tell her Soraya is here, he said calmly, and that it's about the warlord. For a long moment, there was silence. Then one of the guards turned and pressed a button on his wrist console. A crackling voice came through the speaker. Let them in. The door hissed open. Eric and Soraya stepped inside. The room beyond was filled with glowing data screens, weapon crates, and a half-assembled starship engine. A woman stood in the center, surrounded by tech specialists and armed enforcers. She was tall, with short platinum hair, piercing violet eyes, and a jagged scar running down her left cheek. Vena. She turned slowly, her eyes locking onto Soraya. Well, she said, crossing her arms. I never thought I'd see you again. Soraya's voice was steady. I need your help. Vena smirked. And why would I help you? Eric stepped forward. Because the warlord took her daughter, and we're going to get her back. Vena studied him for a moment, then let out a slow chuckle. You're either very brave or very stupid. Eric smiled. A little of both. Vena tilted her head, considering. Then, finally, she sighed. All right, she said. Let's talk. The room fell silent. Eric could feel the weight of Vena's gaze on him, sharp and calculating. She was assessing him, deciding if he was worth her time, if he was worth the risk. Soraya stood still beside him, her hands clenched at her sides. She knew this was their only shot. Vena was the only person who could get them onto the obsidian fang. If she refused to help, they had nowhere else to turn. Vena sighed, running a hand through her platinum hair. You're asking for a lot, she said. Breaking into the warlord's flagship isn't just dangerous. It's a death sentence. Eric smirked. I've faced worse. Vena arched an eyebrow. That so? He nodded. I once stole a warlord's private gunship from under his nose. Another time, I walked into a syndicate stronghold and walked out with a bounty hunter's head. You think a floating fortress scares me? Vena studied him for a moment, then turned her attention to Soraya. And you? Soraya's silver eyes were unwavering. I don't care what it takes. I'm getting my daughter back. Something in Vena's expression shifted. She wasn't an easy woman to read, but for a brief moment, Eric thought he saw something. Maybe a flicker of recognition, of understanding. Then she sighed. All right, I'll help, but this isn't going to be easy. She motioned for them to follow her. Vena led them through the dimly lit corridors of her hideout, past rows of weapons, data terminals, and tech specialists working on stolen cyberware. She stopped in front of a massive holodeble. With a flick of her wrist, a holographic projection of the obsidian fang appeared, rotating slowly above the surface. Eric let out a low whistle. He had expected the warlord's flagship to be intimidating, but seeing it up close like this was something else. The ship was massive, nearly 2 kilometers long, its dark hull bristling with weapon emplacements and security drones. Vena pointed at the ship's underbelly. There's only one way in without triggering every alarm on board. The maintenance hatches. They're small, heavily guarded, and only open when supply freighters dock. But she tapped a blinking section of the projection. There's a shipment coming in tomorrow. If we time it right, we can slip in with the cargo. Soraya nodded. Once we're inside. Vena exhaled. That's where things get tricky. The warlord's security is airtight. Patrols, surveillance drones, biometric scanners. If we trip even one alarm, we're dead. Eric crossed his arms. Then we don't trip an alarm. Vena smirked. Easier said than done. The Obsidian Fang isn't just a warship. It's a fortress. And the warlord? He doesn't take chances. If he even suspects an intruder, he'll lock down the entire ship. Eric glanced at Soraya. How much do you know about the layout? Soraya's expression darkened. Enough. Lyrian is being held in the inner sanctum. That's where the warlord keeps anything. She hesitated, choosing her words carefully. Valuable. Vena nodded. Getting in will be difficult, but getting out, that's a whole different nightmare. Even if you find the girl, you'll have an entire army between you and the exit. Eric shrugged. Then we make sure we have a way out. Vena stared at him for a long moment, then let out a low chuckle. You're either insane or suicidal. Eric grinned. Maybe both. Vena sighed. Fine. We'll do this my way. You get one shot at this, and if you screw up, I'm not coming to save you. She turned to one of her techs. Get the equipment ready. We move at dawn. The next morning, Eric, Soraya, and Vena crouched in the shadows of a docking bay, watching as a massive cargo freighter hovered above the landing pad. The air was thick with the scent of burning fuel, and the distant hum of security drones buzzed in their ears. Eric adjusted the stolen uniform he was wearing. A standard-issue mechanic suit, identical to those worn by the freighter crew. It was a tight fit, but it would do. Vena handed him a small device. This is a scrambler. It'll buy you 30 seconds of silence if you need to disable a security feed. Use it wisely. Eric took it and slipped it into his belt. Got it. Soraya pulled on her own disguise, her fingers trembling slightly as she fastened the front. Eric saw the fear in her eyes, but she held her head high. Vena gave them both one last look. Once you're in, you're on your own. Get the girl and get out. Eric nodded. See you on the other side. As the cargo freighter's bay doors opened, they moved. Blending in with the rest of the workers, they stepped onto the loading platform. No one paid them any attention. The security officers barely glanced at them, more focused on scanning the shipments than the people carrying them. Step by step, they moved deeper into the ship. So far, so good. But Eric knew that the real challenge was yet to come. The air inside the Obsidian Fang was thick with the scent of metal and burning circuits. The hum of machinery vibrated through the walls, a constant reminder that they were deep inside enemy territory. Eric kept his head down, pushing a heavy crate forward as he and Soraya followed the rest of the workers into the loading bay. Their stolen uniforms had worked so far, but they couldn't rely on disguises forever. Soraya kept glancing toward the far end of the bay, where a massive reinforced door led deeper into the ship. That was their next challenge, getting past security and making it to the inner sanctum where Lyrian was being held. Eric nudged her gently. Relax. You're staring too much. Soraya exhaled and tried to focus, but Eric could see the tension in her jaw. He didn't blame her. They were running on borrowed time. One mistake, one wrong move, and it was over. Vena's voice crackled in their hidden earpieces. You two need to move. There's a patrol shift in 5 minutes. If you're still standing there when it happens, you're dead. Eric gave a small nod. Got it. He scanned the area quickly. The security checkpoint had 2 guards, both armed with plasma rifles. Behind them, a biometric scanner flashed every few seconds, verifying the identity of each worker before allowing them through. A direct approach was out of the question. They needed a distraction. Eric tapped his earpiece. "Vena, what's nearby?" "Anything we can use to cause a little chaos." Vena was silent for a moment before responding. "There's a power relay 3 meters from your position. Overload it, and it'll short out the entire sector." Eric grinned. "Perfect." Soraya's eyes widened. "That'll trigger alarms." "Only if they know it was us," Eric said. He grabbed a metal tool from his belt and moved toward the relay. With quick, practiced movements, he pried open the panel, exposing a tangled mess of wires. He didn't have time to be precise. He just needed something to spark. A quick twist, a hard yank. Sparks erupted from the console. The lights overhead flickered. A low, angry hum filled the air as power began to surge wildly through the system. Then, boom, the lights cut out completely, plunging the area into darkness. Emergency sirens blared as red warning lights flickered on. Shouts rang out. "Power surge in Sector 9. Find the source." The guards at the checkpoint turned away, their attention now on their comms. "Now," Eric whispered. He and Soraya moved, slipping past the distracted guards and through the security door. Inside, the ship was quieter, more controlled. The chaos of the loading bay felt like a distant echo. Soraya gripped Eric's arm. "Where now?" Eric pulled up the stolen schematics Vena had given them. "We're 2 levels below the inner sanctum. There's a service hatch ahead. It leads to an access tunnel that should take us right under Lyrian's holding cell." Soraya nodded, determination burning in her eyes. They moved quickly, staying in the shadows as they navigated the narrow corridors. The deeper they went, the more the ship's design changed. The industrial look of the lower levels gave way to something sleeker, more refined. The walls were lined with gold trim. The lighting was softer, almost eerie. This was where the warlord kept his most prized possessions. Soraya clenched her fists. "She's here. I can feel it." Eric pressed a hand to her shoulder. "Then let's not waste time." They reached the access hatch. It was locked, but Eric had come prepared. He pulled out a small data spike and jammed it into the control panel. The device whirred softly as it bypassed the ship's security. The hatch clicked open. Eric pulled it aside and motioned for Soraya to go first. She slid inside without hesitation. Eric followed, pulling the hatch shut behind them. The tunnel was cramped, barely big enough for them to crawl through. It smelled of oil and old circuitry, but it was a straight shot to their destination. After what felt like an eternity, they reached the end. Another hatch. Eric pressed his ear against it. No movement. No voices. He slowly turned the handle. The hatch opened into a dimly lit chamber. Eric climbed out first, scanning the area. It was a storage room, small, filled with ornate chests and strange artifacts. The walls were lined with silk drapes, giving the room a disturbingly elegant feel. Soraya pulled herself out of the hatch and straightened. Her eyes darted around. "Where is she?" Eric checked his map. "Next room." Soraya didn't wait for him. She moved to the door and pushed it open. Inside was a lavish chamber. A bed covered in deep blue fabric sat against the far wall. Golden lamps cast a soft glow over the room. And there, sitting on the edge of the bed, was Lyrian. She looked up, her silver eyes wide with shock. "Mother." Soraya let out a breath she had been holding for too long. "Lyrian." She rushed forward, pulling the girl into her arms. Lyrian clung to her, trembling. "You came for me." Soraya pressed a kiss to her forehead. "Always." Eric gave them a moment, then stepped forward. "We have to move. Now." But before he could take another step, the door behind them slammed shut. A voice filled the room, smooth, cold, amused. You really thought you could take what belongs to me? Eric turned slowly. Standing in the doorway was the warlord himself, and he was smiling. The air in the chamber thickened with tension as the warlord stepped forward, his towering figure blocking the only exit. His black and gold robes shimmered under the dim lights, and his piercing crimson eyes locked onto Eric and Soraya with a twisted sense of amusement. Eric instinctively shifted his stance, placing himself between the warlord and Soraya, who still held Lyrian protectively in her arms. He knew that fighting wasn't an option. Not here, not now. The warlord's reputation was infamous across the galaxy. He didn't just rule through fear. He ruled through sheer, undeniable power. A slow smile crept across the warlord's face as he studied them. You truly are foolish, he mused. His voice was smooth, confident, the kind that sent chills down a person's spine. Did you think I wouldn't anticipate this? That I wouldn't be prepared? Eric clenched his fists. We're leaving with Lyrian. The warlord chuckled, a deep, resonating sound that felt more like a predator toying with its prey. Oh, you will leave, he said, but not in the way you think. The walls trembled. A low, mechanical hum filled the air, and suddenly, energy barriers activated around the room, sealing them inside a shimmering force field. Soraya's grip on Lyrian tightened. You monster, she hissed. She's your daughter. The warlord tilted his head slightly, as if considering her words. Then he smirked. Daughter. He let the word roll off his tongue with mockery. She is my creation, my legacy. And you. He turned his gaze to Lyrian, his eyes narrowing. You betrayed me. Lyrian trembled, but she didn't look away. You never gave me a choice, she said, her voice small but firm. You wanted me to be your weapon. I refuse. The warlord's expression darkened. Foolish child. Do you think you can deny what you are? Your blood, your power, it belongs to me. Eric's mind raced. They had minutes, maybe seconds, before this situation spiraled out of control. He subtly reached for the hidden device in his sleeve, a last resort that Vena had given him before they infiltrated the ship. The warlord continued, his voice turning sharper. I gave you everything. Power, strength, a purpose. And yet you choose them. His eyes flicked to Eric and Soraya, his disgust evident. You side with the weak. Lyrian took a deep breath. No, I side with freedom. The warlord's lip curled. Then you will suffer their fate. He raised his hand. The air crackled with energy. The entire room pulsed with raw power, the force of it nearly suffocating. The warlord's fingers curled into a claw-like shape, and a surge of violet lightning arced toward them. Eric reacted instantly. With one swift motion, he activated the device in his sleeve and hurled it to the floor. A blinding white light exploded outward. The energy barrier flickered. The warlord staggered back, momentarily caught off guard. Run, Eric shouted. Soraya didn't hesitate. She grabbed Lyrian's hand, and together they sprinted for the only possible escape, the ventilation shaft on the far side of the chamber. Eric followed, his heart pounding as alarms blared throughout the ship. The warlord recovered quickly, his face contorted with fury. With a single gesture, he sent another wave of energy cascading toward them. Eric barely managed to dive out of the way as the blast struck the wall, leaving a smoking crater where he had just been standing. Keep going, he yelled at Soraya and Lyrian. Soraya reached the shaft first, pushing Lyrian inside before turning back to Eric. Come on. The warlord stepped forward, power crackling around him. You cannot escape me, he growled. Eric met his gaze. Watch me. He leaped for the shaft just as another energy blast struck, shaking the entire chamber. Soraya grabbed his arm and yanked him inside, and the three of them slid down the dark, narrow tunnel as the ship trembled around them. Behind them, the warlord's enraged roar echoed through the corridors. But they weren't safe yet, because now the entire ship was hunting them. The ventilation shaft was narrow, the cold metal walls pressing in on them as they slid downward at an alarming speed. Eric gritted his teeth, trying to slow himself with his hands, but the friction burned his palms. Soraya clutched Lyrian tightly, ensuring the girl didn't tumble out of control. Behind them, the warlord's voice boomed through the ship's communication system. "You cannot run from me. You cannot hide. This ship is mine, and so is your fate." Eric could hear the distant sound of mechanical locks shifting, bulkheads sealing. The warlord was cutting off their escape routes one by one. The entire ship was now their cage. The shaft ended abruptly. Eric barely had time to brace himself before he shot out, landing hard on a grated walkway. Soraya and Lyrian followed, tumbling to the ground beside him. The space they had entered was dimly lit, a maintenance corridor lined with pipes and flickering lights. Lyrian winced, rubbing her arm. Where now? Eric scanned their surroundings. The map Vena had shown him before the mission flashed through his mind. They were near the lower docking bays. If they could reach the launch control room, they might still have a chance to escape. Soraya pulled herself up, her breathing heavy. "We can't stay here. He's already tracking us." A low hum filled the air. A second later, a row of automated turrets dropped from the ceiling. Their targeting sensors locked onto them with a series of sharp beeps. Eric's pulse spiked. "Move." The first turret fired. He shoved Soraya and Lyrian behind a row of crates as laser bolts scorched the ground where they had just been standing. Sparks flew, the air thick with the smell of burning metal. Soraya grabbed her blaster and fired back, but the turret's shielding absorbed the hit effortlessly. "They're reinforced," she shouted. Eric's mind raced. They couldn't fight their way through this, not without better firepower. He peeked around the crates, scanning the environment. There, a control panel on the far wall. If he could override the system, he could shut the turrets down. But getting there would be nearly impossible. Lyrian suddenly grabbed his arm. "Let me do it." Eric blinked. "What?" "I know the ship's systems," she said urgently. "I know how he thinks. He'll have built-in failsafes, but I can override them. You just need to get me to that panel." Eric hesitated. The panel was at least 15 feet away, completely exposed. One wrong move, and she'd be gunned down in seconds. Soraya caught his look and nodded. "We'll cover her." Eric exhaled sharply. "All right. On my signal." He grabbed a piece of shattered metal from the ground and hurled it to the left. The moment it clanged against the floor, drawing the turret's attention, he bolted forward. Soraya opened fire, forcing the sensors to recalibrate. Lyrian sprinted, her small frame making her harder to target. She skidded to a stop at the panel and yanked off the access cover. Her fingers flew over the controls. "I need 10 seconds, she shouted. Eric ducked behind another crate as laser bolts tore through the air. "You've got 5. Lyrian gritted her teeth, sweat beading on her forehead as she bypassed the security protocols. The system fought back, auto-locking functions as quickly as she tried to disable them. The turrets whirred, recalibrating. Lyrian. Almost there. A turret swung in her direction. Its barrel glowed as it charged up for a lethal shot. Eric's heart lurched. He moved before he could think, throwing himself in front of her just as the turrets powered down. Silence filled the corridor. Lyrian let out a shaky breath. Got it. Eric exhaled, lowering his arms. That was too close. Soraya ran up, glancing warily at the disable turrets. He knows we're here. We need to go. Lyrian pointed to a hatch in the floor. That leads to the secondary hangar. There might be ships we can use. Eric nodded. Then let's move. They pried the hatch open and climbed down into a dimly lit storage bay. The smell of fuel and engine grease filled the air. Several small fighter ships lined the hangar, but a security team was already patrolling the area. Soraya cursed under her breath. We don't have time for this. Eric's jaw tightened. There were too many guards to take on directly, and reinforcements would be arriving any minute. Then Lyrian whispered, I have an idea. She pulled out a small data chip from her pocket. "This is a backdoor program I created when I was younger. If I can access the ship's mainframe, I can cause a full system shutdown, long enough for us to escape." Soraya eyed her. "And how exactly do we get you to the mainframe without getting caught?" Eric looked around, then spotted something. The control tower above the hangar. It had a direct uplink to the ship's core systems. "That's our way in," he said. Soraya frowned. "It's heavily guarded." Eric smirked. "Then we'll give them something else to worry about." Before anyone could question him, he grabbed a nearby fuel canister, yanked open a vent, and shoved it inside. Then he picked up a discarded blaster and set it to overload. "Get ready to run," he said, placing the blaster next to the canister. The moment he pulled the trigger, an explosion rocked the hangar. Flames burst through the vents, alarms blared, and chaos erupted. As guards scrambled to contain the fire, Eric, Soraya, and Lyrian sprinted for the tower. They weren't out of danger yet. But they had a chance, and they were going to take it.